Well, hello, lovely humans, and welcome back to my channel. It is officially fall, which means things are changing. They are. Slowly but surely, the leaves outside are all turning into golden colors, and the Uggs are slowly crawling their way from their hibernation station onto every woman's feet. And the call of the basic girl who loves pumpkin everything must be heeded. And I know a lot of you are thinking, oh, Jamie's way too cool to fall victim to all of the basicness of fall. And I'm here to tell you, no, I'm not. I was basically legally obligated to put on a turtleneck and light a pumpkin-scented candle in the background for making this video, even though it's gonna be 86 degrees here in Texas today. But them's the rules. Fall is such an iconic time. The weather changes, the colors change, it smells different, and the word pumpkin is slapped on just about everything to make it work for the season. But how does that apply to weddings? Well, I'm glad you asked. Which, by the way, if you're looking for some fall pinspiration, jump on down there. We have a whole fall wedding board that is just like, it's delicious. And if you guys are looking for some fall wedding inspiration, hop on down there, give it a gander, and pin it to your heart's content, because again, it's an experience for your senses. So of course, as I do, I put together a list of 5 things that you will need to consider to have the perfect fall wedding, as well as a couple little helpful tips at the end, as I do normally. So without further ado, let's just jump right on into it. First and foremost, we're just gonna go with the most obvious and the most basic, the weather. Now, of course, fall weather can be quite erratic and it is not consistent across the board. I have no idea where you live. If you are in Australia, you might be like, Jamie, it's really, really hot here. I don't know. But for those of us that are in the Northern Hemisphere, a lot of us are turning into cooler temperatures. But that doesn't mean that all of us are. Like I said, here in Texas, it is going to be in the low to mid 80s today. And it's October. Why? But in places like, I don't know, the Pacific Northwest, it's probably getting a little bit cooler. So that is something that you will absolutely need to keep in mind for planning your event, especially if you're going outdoors, which is always a fun idea because the outdoor color changes that are happening are absolutely gorgeous, but you do need to keep the comfort and the temperature of your guests in mind. I mean, maybe not their like physical temperature, but the temperature around them. So if it is going to drop below 65 degrees, you do need to bring in space heaters. And while 65 degrees doesn't sound like a very low amount, people are like, a lot of people might hear that and think, oh, what? No, I could totally handle lower than 65 degrees. Sure, but that doesn't mean that some of your guests are gonna handle that well. So be sure to keep a close eye on what the weather is going to be looking like in your wedding venue's area and employ space heaters at the last minute if you need to. You also need to be on the lookout for rain. But this is the case with any location, with any season. There are rainy seasons that differ across the board. It is good to always have a rainy day backup plan, especially if you can find a venue that has an indoor space that really will mitigate some of the weather issues that could come up during a fall event. With the whole space heater thing, I do hear a lot of, oh, it's okay, I'll just get some blankets for my guests. And while that does sound like a really fun idea, it can be really expensive to purchase a blanket for every single person. And if it's cold enough, every single person is going to want one. It's a nice little added touch, but space heaters are going to be where you get the most bang for your buck if you're doing an outdoor space for your fall wedding. The next thing to consider is the cost. Now, this is for obviously all the people who are planning further than like the next handful of months. If they're planning for, next year or in 2 years and you're really kind of hunting around during the fall season, this is such a great time to find a location for off-season prices. Now, this typically is venues, but occasionally you'll find vendors that charge less during the off season as well, because they're just kind of happy to book a gig in the middle of November when they don't normally book a gig. This may or may not be the case, but it's definitely worth asking. It doesn't hurt to ask if you could save $1,000 on a wedding venue. You know what I mean? So, oftentimes, I think for a lot of places, it can be like March through October or March through November. So if you are willing to scoot your date back another 2 weeks, it could potentially save you $1,000 or more. Now, that does mean that you will be put in slightly more unfavorable weather, but like we just talked about, there are ways to mitigate that to make sure your guests are still super comfortable. The next thing you're going to want to consider is attire, both for yourself and your bridal party. I know growing up in California, I would want to put on a sweater for Thanksgiving Day and get like halfway through cooking and just be like, I can't wear this, and go put on a tank top. So it really does vary, but the nights cool down really, really nicely. Take all of that into account when you are figuring out what you are going to wear, what your spouse to be is going to wear, and what your wedding party is going to wear. Ideally, this is not the time for short dresses for the gals in your wedding party. Although it could be warmer during the day, if it dips to pretty low temperatures during the night, they don't really have the opportunity to cover their legs unless they bust out those Uggs we were just talking about. This is a great opportunity to really lean into layering, especially for yourself. If you are wearing a wedding dress and it doesn't have sleeves on it, I would consider getting like a pashmina, which is that beautiful blankety scarf type thing that just looks so delicious in pictures. A little bolero jacket. You can do a denim jacket like that DIY one I did a couple weeks back. That's always a really fun idea. Do recognize at a certain point in the night, you probably will get cold, so it's good to plan ahead something that goes with your outfit instead of at the last minute borrowing someone's suit jacket and then just kind of be covered in that bulky fabric, which, praise God, keeps you warm but doesn't always go with the aesthetic. Same can be said for your wedding party as well. For any of the gals in your wedding party, you can do a fun little DIY like we just mentioned, or encourage them to bring their own denim jackets so they don't get cold. So you don't necessarily have to buy something for absolutely everyone in your wedding party, but encourage them to bring something, because when you're miserable and you're cold, you don't want to stick around. You want to go home and you want to get warm. It is also a really good idea to let your guests know if your event is going to be outdoors, because although we've done our best to combat any of the weather issues that might come up by having a rain contingency plan and by providing outdoor space heaters and or blankets, you do still need to let them know that it will be outside. The best way to do this is on your wedding website. If you give them the warning that it's going to be outdoors, most guests are smart enough to go ahead and grab a jacket to bring along with them, but it's really, really polite to give them a heads up. The next item to consider, number 4, would be food. Now, like I said, people slap the word pumpkin onto just about everything during this season. You do not have to have anything pumpkin related at your wedding at all whatsoever. There is no requirement for you to have any form of squash in your wedding meal. It is, however, a really good idea to lean into that comfort food idea. It's during the season that we all kind of put on those stretchy pants and lean into stuff like mashed potatoes real hard, which is another reason why this is one of my favorite seasons, because mashed potatoes is one of my favorite foods. But it's not the time for a light summer salad anymore. No, we want to lean into some of the warmer ideas, and you really do want to lean into some of the seasonal fruits and vegetables that are available, because not only will it be more cost effective, but it'll give that cozy fall vibe that so many of us crave during this season. Again, no one's saying you got to do a butternut squash puree, all right? That's not necessarily what we're saying here. But go with something that's seasonal and go with something that evokes that cozy vibe could be a really, really good way to go. You could also do something super fun like a s'mores bar, which I think are absolutely genius, because it's a way to get an interactive thing going for your guests, and you got a fire pit for people to keep cozy in front of. So you kind of kill 2 birds with 1 stone. You get something that's entertaining and something that's delicious. I guess there's 3 birds, and it keeps them warm. And then the 5th thing to consider is what you are serving to drink. Yes, people will still obviously need stuff like water or any other non-alcoholic beverage options like iced tea and or lemonade, because if you're shaking your tail feather on the dance floor, you may still get a little bit warm. So it is a good idea to keep those on hand. But it's also the time that people will lean into heartier drinks. Probably a little bit less margaritas and white crisp wines and more of the hot toddy and mulled spiced wine idea. Anything that you can really do to help invoke that coziness, keep your guests warm and satiated with their drink desires, because as we've seen at events, if someone is to lean in a lot into the cold beverage idea when it's cold out, it tends to be a waste of money, because a lot of people don't want an ice cold white wine when it's 57 degrees outside. It's just, that's not how it works. So when it comes to your bar, be sure to lean into the things that are less cold. You don't necessarily have to have a hot drink option, but definitely kind of stay away from the super cold, crisp, and refreshing ideas. Also, if alcohol is not your thing, this is a great opportunity for a hot cocoa, coffee, and or tea bar for your guests to put together their own little warm bevy to keep them nice and toasty. And this last category is just like miscellaneous things to consider, because I couldn't figure out what to label them in. First of all, daylight savings time. Whether you're in an area where the time actually changes or not, the sun does set earlier in the fall season and in the winter season, obviously. But definitely have a conversation with your photographer to make sure that you have ample time to take photos before the sun goes down. You're gonna wanna make sure you carve out time during that golden hour, which could actually coincide with your regular cocktail hour time photos. But be sure that you are paying careful attention to when the sun is setting so you don't miss your opportunity. Next, busy weekends. So there's kind of like 2 things that fall into this one. 1, holidays, and 2, sports. sports are not necessarily my thing, but I know that they are for a lot of people. There are quite a few holiday weekends during the fall season, and you can either choose to avoid them entirely or really lean into them. Our wedding actually was on a fall holiday. We got married on Halloween. It did affect our guest count a little bit, but not drastically, at least not that I know of. But that is something to keep in mind. If you're gonna have it near Halloween, some people may choose to opt out because it's their favorite holiday of the year and they really, really want to celebrate that. Other people may not care at all. If it's on another holiday weekend where there's typically an extra day off for a lot of people, they may already have some trips booked. So just bear in mind that holiday times can be kind of like a 50-50 shot here. So it could either be that people take advantage of a long weekend or they could already be booked for the long weekend. That and sports. If you have a lot of people in your family that are die-hard football fans with the NFL playing on, is it college ball on Saturday and NFL on Sunday? See, I don't know these things. It may be a good idea to have a TV somewhere if your diehard fans really do not want to miss a game. Some of you may be like, yeah, absolutely, that sounds great. And others of you may be like, no, it's my wedding day. Absolutely not. They're going to pay attention to me. You do what's best for you, but you also know your family and friends way better than I do. So if they are diehard fans, consider adding a little loophole to make sure that they show up, but they're not ticked for missing the game. And then the last thing to consider is the color palette for your event. You don't necessarily have to use a burnt orange and a burgundy for your event, although we love those colors during the season. You don't have to use them. You can do whatever you want with your fall palette. Like, I didn't have those colors in my wedding. But if you are outside with a bunch of color changing leaves, it might be a little bit hard to fight that palette. So just keep that in mind. If your venue or your ceremony location has a lot of those tones in it, you might want to keep your palette more neutral, where you don't necessarily have to incorporate those, but you don't want to fight those colors with your own color palette. So if you're in a spot where it has those, embrace them if you can. So that's all we have for this week's video, guys. Thank you so much for stopping by. If you haven't done so already, jump on down there and hit that like button and subscribe for more tips and tricks for the modern day bride and hang out with me every single week, even though I just admitted to a lot of you that I'm very, very basic when it comes to fall, and I have no qualms about it. There are so many pumpkins in this house right now. I am not even sorry. And until next week, bye guys.